It should be live now. Yeah, we're live.
All right, sounds good. I guess we didn't talk about it ahead of time, but I got about an hour ish, maybe hour and a half.
Okay.
I'll let you start it out. What are we talking about?
Well, let's see. When I met you, it seemed like your idea of kind of what constituted crop deaths was those animals that were run over by tractors or got caught up in a combine or a plow.
Yeah, that was about it. That's kind of what I thought it meant. Yeah,
So at that point, there's a lot of vegans out there today that still believe that,
I would assume so. I would assume the majority probably.
right? So that's something that I think that influencers, vegan influencers should try to change because it would be congruent with caring about animals. Obviously, you know it.
Hmm.
It's obvious, I think, to most people. Um, so, what is your? I think you did some while I was on vacation. You did some. Uh, you called uh, some government bodies in your state that oversee um, deer deer hunting permits for crop damage issues.
Hmm.
Correct?
Yeah. I called and talked to a handful of people. So with that one, with the Fish and Wildlife Department of Oregon, I basically just asked a bunch of questions about topics me and you had talked about, and so I asked what would happen if deer were eating vegetation on cropland. And they informed me that in Oregon, the majority of it's elk, actually not deer, but that if somebody was having some issues, they would give them recommendations of things referred to as hazing permits. I'm sure you know exactly what this stuff is, but basically just saying that normally you couldn't like run your tractor towards an elk to scare it. You can't like threaten it. But once you get the permit from the state saying yes, because they're damaging your property, you can scare it, and that's the first attempt they go for. And then they'll send some biologists out to see how much damage is done. And if you can't get rid of them, then they'll sell you a permit to kill it, so like a hunter's permit. So I guess the farmer could either have a friend of theirs that's a hunter kill it and they take it and eat it, or the farmer can kill it themselves and give it away or eat it themselves. But that you have to pay per tag. And I don't know if it led me to change my mind on anything specifically, but I did find it interesting to learn the process for sure.
Okay. Now you're aware that is speaking about deer. That is a protected species. So the majority of species are not protected. So you understand that
Hmm.
there's no permitting process. You don't have to pay per animal that you kill if it's say a native squirrel or a groundhog or a mole or a vole or a raccoon. There's
Hmm.
the list of non-protected species is much 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 longer than the list of protected species. Would you agree?
Correct. Yeah, I think in Oregon there's like a season for squirrels, so there's a time that it doesn't matter at all, and then there's a time where you need a permit. But yeah, for the most part, including squirrels, all rodents are fair game, and most birds. There's a few birds that are protected, but yeah, it seems I don't know the exact reason. I don't know if how endangered they are, but yeah, very few are protected.
Okay, so you haven't looked into like endangered species, how
No.
what constitutes an endangered species. We would assume that that means that the population now has gotten so low that there's a danger of extinction, right? I think I saw an
Hmm.
article in the paper just last week that said that they had recently taken 21 species off of the endangered list recently because they were extinct now. They were no longer endangered.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know. I guess I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I don't know if I have much of a thought on animals going extinct. That might sound bad, but I don't. In a sense, I don't care as long as they don't affect the ecosystem. Like I don't want the extinction of an animal to harm any other animals or humans. And if they do, then I don't like that idea. But the idea of an animal that like let's say something like the dodo bird, the idea of a species all jumping off a cliff to their death or something and not existing anymore, it means almost nothing to me. And so an animal being endangered, obviously in most cases we're going to be talking about the animal's endangered because of humans taking up a lot of land and the actions humans do. And so maybe we shouldn't do those actions. But
Mm.
do you care about the idea of a species just not existing for some reason?
Um, in a vacuum, no. In a
Okay.
vacuum, in a vacuum, no. Um, however, it really depends on how I look at it. I do I think that the more science someone learns, the more magical everything seems to have been created. You know that this system is much more complicated and awesome than say a Ferrari or an F-15 fighter jet. And if you were to find an F-15 fighter jet sitting in the sand in the Sahara Desert, you would probably think that anyone that was trying to argue that jet had appeared from a random, it was a random occurrence that this jet kind of fell together. And when you look at the universe, you know, as far as we can see with the galaxies and everything, with the James Webb telescope that they've got now, and the technology of looking the other direction into the microcosms, the atoms, and what's going on in that world, it's an amazingly well put together system. And if you were to change just one little item, the whole thing would kind of fall apart, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, if you were, let's say you were to um, remove whatever it is that causes gravity, you know, let's don't talk about light or other forms of or other forces. Let's just take one force, gravity, and do away with it. What happens then? Uh, the universe
Yeah.
would fall apart, right? So, which one of those, which element of creation could you remove and still have this system? You know, that seems to work
Yeah.
kind of like a clock. If you sit back and watch a galaxy and
Hmm.
its solar systems and all of those things that are going around and around, it is very much like a clock, isn't it? It's probably
Hmm.
more like a clock, more complicated and intricate than any clock that man has ever engineered.
Yeah.
So, you know, in my mind, losing a species is not exactly a harmless endeavor. I think
Hmm.
it can do harm. You're destroying creation, and if you do find time at some point to open a biology book dealing with ecosystems, biodiversity, we know it's a well known fact that as any ecosystem loses biodiversity, then that ecosystem becomes less and less stable and more potentially harmful to all of the different species of animals that live
Hmm.
within it. So every time you lose a species, you're removing biodiversity, you're reducing biodiversity. That's always been a criticism that I've had for veganism, is that those that follow veganism do not, they're not realistic in their view of how the ecosystem, when you hurt the ecosystem, you hurt animals, and
Hmm.
how vegans have sometimes somehow separated the two, I think is a travesty, and it's a tragedy as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I feel that most vegans, their hope would be that humans could stop eating animals, and then also there would be no downside. Um, so I agree with you that since most humans don't have the time of any given day to do a wild amount of research, um, most vegans probably aren't aware of any harm they're doing. But I don't know exactly how they would flip it around. I guess this is what I'd say. Most people probably want to do good, and they want to do simple, lazy good. It's simple to say, I will not put this in my mouth, therefore I am not paying to have this thing killed. So vegans will choose that. But as far as choosing to research where other food comes from, that's a timely thing. Where it's not timely to just it might be tough to refuse meat, dairy, and eggs, but it's a simple choice if you choose to make it, and that's probably why it's easier to do that than the research.
Well, let me ask you about sincerity. Are these vegans that don't take the time to learn about crop deaths, are they sincere? I mean, if it was sincere, would this what you just I think you labeled it laziness? Would laziness prevent a vegan, even a prominent vegan, even a very motivated vegan activist? What's preventing a focus on crop deaths?
Um,
I mean, other than you said it was laziness, and I guess what I'm trying to again, you turn back to this word sincerity. To me, it indicates a lack of sincerity
mm,
in
yeah,
the concern for animals.
Yeah, well, I think part of it just comes down to how much time do we have in our days, you know? And like part of me wants to do the best things I can possibly do while I'm awake. Like, is it better for me to learn how to help starving people in some foreign country than it is to watch some action movie that gives me some joy? And we have to have some kind of balance, or at least, I mean, we don't have to, but in my mind, I need to, for sanity's sake, I have to balance. I have to figure out, okay, how many good things do I want to do, and how much time can I put into that? And I actually do put a lot of time into it. I do things like calling the different departments to find out different things about rodenticides and all this kind of stuff. I like to research stuff and have conversations. I could be watching movies right now or listening to music, but I choose to do conversations like these because I care about suffering of humans and animals. I probably spend more time talking about things like abortion and police issues and things like that, because I care about humans and societies and how they build things. And so I like to do all kinds of research on political history and various different things. So I guess it's just, I wouldn't say that somebody's not sincere if they don't happen to look up something that me and you might call an important thing to look up, like crop deaths. But I I don't know what to call it exactly. Now, if somebody is made aware of an issue and they just turn a blind eye because it doesn't fit their narrative, then that's a bad thing. That makes them bad, vegan or not. But not having the time to look up everything, like you were just talking about, opening up a biology book, which I'd love to. I have a stronger interest personally in history and politics and, let's say, moral philosophy than I do biology. So when it comes to something like biology, or let's take something like global warming, I don't even discuss global warming with anybody anymore because I realize the amount of effort I would have to do to look into it, to take a stance either way, would take up so much of my time. I couldn't do these other things I prefer to do. So when somebody says, "What do you think about that?" I say, I think that the scientists need to convince the politicians of whatever they need to convince them of, right or wrong. And it has nothing to do with Carson. Carson doesn't know anything about global warming. But I do know a lot about history and politics and philosophy. And so anyways, I just don't know if every vegan will have all the time in the world to look into these things. So hopefully people like me and you, if we truly care, I know I do, and I assume you do, can share information that will open up the eyes of the people, the vegans that don't have time to look into it themselves.
Okay. So basically, it's not, you're saying in your case, it's not laziness, it's not a lack of sincerity, it's that you have a stronger interest in politics and morality, and the animals. While you choose to be vegan, the animals they're not your number one priority.
Well, let me make something perfectly clear. I don't care about animals really at all. I don't like animals. I don't pet dogs or cats. I don't. Sometimes they're kind of cute, and then my natural instinct is to go, oh, that's kind of cute. But I don't care about animals in any way. I care about things suffering, and that's about it. If something can suffer, since I know what suffering can be like, if I know that something doesn't want to suffer, then I don't want it to suffer. So yes, this is I was just pointing out that the research of like crop deaths might not be a top priority to somebody else. It actually is a top priority to me. If it involves the idea of making something suffer, which it does, then I want to know more about it. Because I want whenever possible to not make things suffer.
Mm-hmm. Now you kind of came to the conclusion that crop deaths was, what did you say? You said that it's just kind of a lame. You said it was lame because of your research that you had done with the deer, knowing that the deer in Oregon have to have a permit. The farmers have to catalog every deer that they shoot to protect the crops. That because that was the case with the deer in Oregon, that crop deaths and just in general crop deaths, that means that the numbers aren't as high as perhaps maybe Garland had insinuated. But one of the things I want to do today is kind of, and that's why I've got this visual up here. Every animal on that graphic that I put together has a story involving crop deaths.
Gotcha. Well, real quick, I do want to point out, I don't remember calling it lame. I mean, maybe I did. I've had so many talks, I can't remember exactly. But how I would have to handle a topic like this until I research it enough. Like, for example, I'm hoping that today within a talk, I will have at least one or two studies or something that I can read after we're done as well. Yeah. And then I can like add these to my knowledge of the topic. What I would have to say is that if I was given options and being told, like, let's take a 10-acre area of land. If somebody could take that 10-acre area of land and put enough animals on it that let's say chickens, that they have enough land to run around and have great lives, from what we could scientifically figure out, that they wouldn't even feel like they were forced into an area. They would just be living great lives, and then their lives are just taken out instantly. Like they don't suffer. They're not injected with hormones to grow faster, anything like that. And then we could like detect a hypothetical amount of units of suffering that would come from these chickens. And it doesn't sound like much. It doesn't sound like much at all.
Are these chickens killed by crop protection measures? Or Or we
Oh
have
no,
we
no,
gone
no.
back?
So,
So
so
we're
I'm
talking about animal agriculture again.
I'm just talking about a hypothetical. Just real quick, I just want to lay something out so you can kind of get an idea of where I'm coming from.
At some point, let's move back to crops.
Yes, definitely. So I'm just saying, if you have a 10-acre area of land with chickens that follow the guidelines I just said, and then we knew the units of suffering, which it sounds like none. It actually might be 0 units. And then we took a 10-acre area of land and we planted crops on it, and then we could test out how much suffering came from the pesticides and all these different things. If there is any drop more suffering on that cropland than that chicken land, I declare morally that it is better to have those chickens on that land and kill those chickens and eat those chickens. I'm just showing you like what it takes for me to take that stance is that it's that simple. And until there are more studies, because there a lot of studies need to be done on this topic and like health and all that kind of stuff, we might not have that easy answer. But I hope and wish that all vegans would take this stance, because it seems like the obvious stance to me that like, why would you want to create more suffering of other animals just to not have animal agriculture if the animal agriculture is less harmful? So anyways, we can go on.
Right. And not only that, you know, we live in a world, Carson, where we're conditioned to think within a false dichotomy. It's always a false dichotomy. They want us to choose one of two. Okay. So if you choose Republican or Democrat, then they can keep marching the machine in the direction they want, because the Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C., they're both corrupt. And so they're going to work together. It's well documented behind the scenes. These people are drinking martinis and having barbecues while in front of us, they're carrying on this political theater. So we have this false dichotomy of, changing from the standard American diet, which most people would agree is garbage, except for the fat acceptance people, of course, fat power. But people want the machine wants us to choose between a 100% meat-based diet, no organ meats, no nose to tail, just muscle meat, and the other choice is veganism, and that's the two choices they want us to choose from. That's a false dichotomy. Wouldn't you agree? There are more ways to eat than just being a carnivore or a vegan.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to be an omnivore and you're going to be consuming some plants, or if you're a vegan and you're only going to be eating a little bit of plants, I mean, you're not going to be eating any meat. You're going to be eating nothing but plants. Wouldn't it make sense for those two groups of people to get their heads wrapped around crop deaths? And if we can't find specific studies to try to find the information anyway, why? I mean, these studies are being financed by corporations. We can't sit around and wait for some corporation to do the study for the information that we need. We can actually look up numbers that would give us the facts that we want to know. We can actually acquire those numbers. It just takes a little bit more work than having someone spoon feed you the data with a study. So if we can find studies, great. If not, why don't we do that research ourselves anyway and find out which of these crops are actually causing the most crop deaths?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
If you knew how many the volume, scale, and scope of crop deaths for every crop, then wouldn't you use that information to try to make dietary decisions to harm fewer animals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't make sense. This idea, Jeffrey Phillips, I see, he's there saying crop deaths is not an issue. Crop deaths is not an issue. And that's, he says that over and over and over again. And I know vegans kind of grin with almost it's a scary looking grin that vegans have when they talk about crop deaths. It's a shame that you guys don't come together and as a group focus on this issue and help me focus on these animals and the suffering and death that they're experiencing. This idea that I would have vegans, I never would have guessed that vegans would be so adamant against learning about crop deaths. But don't you think that it does actually hint at some insincerity, given the fact that those are animals too, and they can also suffer and they can also die. In your case, right here on the screen, do you see the manatee?
Yeah.
Yeah. Manatees are manatees die because of crops.
Gotcha.
Do you believe that? Do you believe that?
I believe it's possible. I mean, I have, yeah. I wouldn't claim to know it or anything. But real quick for
agriculture.
Real quick for the sincerity thing. Okay, so a while back, I think you brought up orangutans in a video recently, and that's something I know about now, but I didn't know about much back in the day. And I remember when a lot of vegans on the internet would say, if you eat any products with palm oil in it, that's not vegan, and so therefore you're not a vegan. And I remember thinking those people were ridiculous. And in a sense, I still do, because I hate that idea of telling people you're not a true vegan if you do this, that, or the other. And again, it comes down to this thing where what is easy to do? There are things that are really hard to do, and there's things that are easy to do. You can help a blind person cross the street in a couple minutes, but choosing to donate $5,000 to help somebody's life in Africa that's starving is a little more complicated. And so if you can easily know, okay, what does it take to be vegan? Okay, I don't want to hurt animals. Okay, I'll do this. But then if you start hearing these details like, if you eat palm oil, it's bad, or look at what happens to bees when you harvest almonds. So if you eat almonds, it's not vegan. So when these things were being said, I was finding this ridiculous, and I just was unaware, but I was still sincere. I was genuine. I cared about the animals. I even cared about the animals when I wasn't vegan, but I wanted to. I was like philosophically vegan. And so I think there is a sincerity, and I think it's the more we can learn and do better, the better. In fact, right now, I think we should stay away from palm oil. But there is a hypothetical future where you can have certain amounts of palm oil be created without harming any animals. It just so happens that the main place it's gotten, and the greedy people that want a large amount of palm oil, those actions have destroyed animals. So it's complicated.
So you avoid palm oil?
Personally, yes.
Because of the crop deaths?
Well, I avoid palm oil because I've been convinced that it's not healthy for you.
It's got saturated fat.
I don't know too much about it. I always hear conflicting things. Like some people will say coconut oil is good for you, and then some will say the saturated fat makes it not good for you. In my ideal, like me getting over my food addiction, which I doubt I'll ever get over. It's kind of depressing whenever I hear a very compelling story about alcohol addiction or something. Like I feel like I'm experiencing that with food, because I always go back to unhealthy foods. But yeah, so my personal interest would just be eat fresh fruits, veggies, nuts, and seeds, preferably no pesticides, any of that stuff, and stay away from any processed garbage. And maybe in some world where I'm convinced of it, I'll add meat to that, but I haven't been convinced of that yet.
Right. Let's see here. So you would prefer that all crop farming is organic, but do you eat 100% organic?
I doubt that it's 100%, but close to it. I almost always purchase organic, and the majority of my food I eat is either fresh fruit or I make soups. I just chop up all the veggies, toss them in water, add salt and pepper, and I would say more than 90% organic. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of pyrethrin?
No.
Pyrethrin.
How do you spell that?
It's Pyrethrin.
Okay.
It's derived from chrysanthemum flowers.
That sounds familiar.
So this is one of the primary uh, organic pesticides that is used on organic produce. It kills insects, fish, other aquatic life. It's mildly toxic to birds and mammals. Of course, in order to have this extract of chrysanthemum flowers, of course, you've got to have chrysanthemum crops, which are not raised organically. And so they're using the neonicotinoids, all of the, in other words, if you look at all of the different pesticides that are used in so-called organic farming, you see that, if palm oil, if some vegans, if a considerable number of vegans do not think that palm oil is vegan, then a considerable number of vegans would also consider the pesticides that are used on organic produce not to be vegan either, by far.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So one thing I want to point out is I don't call things vegan or not vegan. I only use the word vegan because it's simple to get the point across that I don't eat animal products.
What I'm talking about here in this sense of the word is something that harms animals and causes animal suffering. So what you're doing is, and this is what I want to hopefully encourage you to do, Carson, is to look a little bit deeper than like some product puts a vegan label on it and you go, okay, great. I can't wait. I can't believe that they finally made a vegan, whatever. Right. And then you go and you make a video about it. I'm eating the new vegan thing. And you look on it, it's got palm oil in it. And some people think that causes a lot of harm and suffering to animals. Whether or not it's vegan or not is beside the point, isn't it? For you, it's whether or not it's causing animal suffering. And so in the case that it's got palm oil, it's causing animal suffering. But then you go out there and you say, well, what about my X, Y, or Z? You say, well, the X and the Y and the Z are organic. They're raised organic. Okay. Are you trying to tell me that organic crops don't use pesticides? Vegan says, yes. Well, guess what? The vegan's wrong. They do use pesticides and they use extracts in some cases, like from this chrysanthemum flower. And the chrysanthemum crops are doing, in other words, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. You're not harming the animals of the crops that you're eating, but you already harmed the animals from the crops that developed so that you could create an extract from those crops and spray on your organic crops and say, oh, there's this 1 degree of separation from all the suffering and death, so I'm not responsible for it.
Yeah, no, and I definitely wouldn't. I would consider myself responsible for that in that case. So there's a couple things. So one thing I want to say about a new vegan product and doing a video. This is not a thing I do pretty much at all. I did post a picture, which I think you might be referring to, about a plant-based Reese's peanut butter cup. And I'm torn between two different things because of how strong I feel about food addiction. Now, I care more about human health than I care about animals. But I care about, so here's the thing. If there is a product that's made that's vegan that will excite people to go vegan, even if it's unhealthy, I'm torn because I kind of want people to take that step to become vegan and then learn about health from then. But I'm also, at the same time, I'm perfectly fine with somebody being healthier and not vegan, and then their healthiness will make them make less bad choices. So anyways, I don't strongly promote the idea of a vegan Reese's or vegan Impossible Burgers or any of that stuff. In fact, I've done a handful of videos commenting on how immoral it actually is to consume these unhealthy foods. And I think I have convinced a handful of people to agree with that. So there's that stance. But
yeah, I understand. But to counter that, you've also made videos about how to make seitan. Seitan is made using gluten that's been extracted from wheat that's grown with those same destructive, harmful neonicotinoids. So,
correct. So for one thing, the neonicotinoids I had never heard of until now. So it all is a learning process. If it turns out that wheat specifically is going to cause more harm and suffering,
no. What I'm saying is that wheat specifically is causing more harm than eating an animal would.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that it's worse than soy or worse than palm oil. I'm just saying that all of those crops, especially the cereal crops, are. And would you agree that the cereal crops are the crops that are associated with livestock feed?
Yeah. Well, I learn constantly all the time. I thought cows were just fed corn, and then I looked into it, and it turns out that they're mostly just fed like grasses of various different kinds. Like I don't know if it's cereal grasses, like the grass from the stalks of oats. I remember looking into it, and I was shocked. Even factory farmed cows are not mostly fed corn, and I was shocked at that.
Right. Factory farm cows are the end of the road for cattle. The nearly 100%, seriously, nearly 100% of all cattle are raised on grassland, like natural prairie grassland. And that's what they mean when they say livestock is using all of this acreage. Well, if you go back 200 years, it wasn't full of cattle, sheep, and goats. It was full of bison and elk and moose and deer. In fact, back then, there were like 160 million head of these ruminants in the continental United States, and now there's only about 120 million. So the numbers of ruminants have actually come down. But these cattle are fed in pastures. They're out there eating natural forages. During the winter time, they will supplement with hay, okay? Hay and alfalfa, and that accounts for a minority of crops grown in the world. The majority of the crops are being grown for items consisting of items that would be consumed by humans. For instance, the soybean. The soybeans are 99% of the soybeans in the world are processed to extract the oil. The oil is very valuable per ounce compared to the meal, which is left over. The meal that's left over is worth money as well. And there's a lot of it because right now the best they can do is about per each soybean, only about 80% of it or only about 20% of it is oil. So they can squeeze as much of that oil as they can out of it, but then it's mostly an inedible waste because it's been soaked in hexane. It's about 50% hardcore cellulose, so it'd be like eating sawdust, basically. And so it's not edible. And so they're able to feed it to ruminant animals and then turn it into, meat that's got vitamins in it, essential nutrients that otherwise the vegans would have to go and build factories and burn petroleum and coal and all of these fossil fuels that are required to produce all of the supplements that vegans, rely upon. Now, of course, they'll say, well, cattle, for instance, are given B12 supplements. Not for the most part, they're not. for the most part, they're given cobalt
Yeah.
supplements, and the cobalt, they can naturally turn that into B12, just like they would if they were out on the prairie. But
Yeah.
it's not like you've got a small number of the cattle that are being raised on pasture, and the majority of them are being raised in a feedlot, what you're calling a factory farm. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that is the end stage. That's before it goes to the pack, where the packers would take the animals and slaughter them, and send them off to
Interesting.
supermarkets.
Wait, so you're saying factory farmed cows, cows that at some point are in feedlots. You're saying the majority of their lives they're kind of roaming free range?
Well, there are different grazing management styles. Free range is actually the worst way you can do it, because when you just open the gates and say, okay, I'm a property owner and I own 1,000 acres, I'm going to go buy 1,000 cows and I'm going to let them have that 1,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And those cows are going to go out there and they're going to spread out, and there's going to be a lot of room between each cow. Not that they need all that room between each cow, because being close to each other is not a distressing situation for a cow. But they're going to spread out, which means that they're going to have to walk across this grass to get to the grass that they want to eat. And then this cow is going to walk on the grass that cow was going to eat. And pretty soon, that goes on day after day. They start beating paths. In other words, their feet are degrading the vegetation. They're wandering around in a kind of a random manner, eating the sweetest thing to their tongue at the time. So they're not they're being choosy and picky in what they're eating, and that is not the way it works in nature.
Yeah, they're not rationalizing for sure. But can you tell me the difference? Because I thought that with regenerative farming, that's kind of what you want and what you do. So what's the difference between, say, what you would do with a cow? I don't know if you have cows or just goats or which things, but if you had acres full of cows, what's the difference between what you do and what a factory farm does? Because it sounds like you're defending factory farming, which is fine. Oh, no?
No,
Okay.
no. What factory farms do is they call them CAFOs. So they're concentrated feedlot operations, and they concentrate all of these animals in as small spot as possible, and have them exercise and walk just as little as possible, and they provide them as much water and food that they'll eat for 3 months. Okay, those are the 3 months before slaughter. The 14 or 16 months prior to that, they were on a farm. They were on a regular farm where they were grazing in a pasture.
Okay. But something different than what you'd call free range. I kind of use that word loosely.
Right. But when I've heard you use the free range, it's kind of like you're thinking as much square footage per animal as possible. So you want those cows, one cow on this acre, another cow on that acre, another cow on that acre, versus like all those cows on 1 acre would be terrible for the cow.
I figure there's a mathematical equation that can be figured out that if you basically took a handful of animals and gave them a certain amount of space, at some point you're going to get to where there will be no suffering at all. If you go smaller and they're crammed together, there will be a certain amount of suffering. And then at some point, any larger than a certain point will just be wasted space. So there's probably an ideal amount of space that the animals would have a great life for the rest of their lives. And so what I mean by free range, which is an inaccurate term, I shouldn't be using that. But what I mean when I say free range is the closest you can get to whatever the ideal life for that animal is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at it. Let's to the point that I was trying to make. Let's make it overall. There's 2 categories. Okay. There's what you call factory farms. I call them concentrated feedlots. And then there's the rest of farming, where animals are out on pasture eating grasses and weeds and berries and leaves that are growing naturally in a natural prairie environment. Okay,
Okay.
there are different styles of management for that type of farming. Some are better than others for the benefit of the animals and for the ecosystem. On the other hand, you have just really one type of concentrated feedlot, what you're calling a factory farm, where the cows are all walking around in their own shit all the time and being fed corn and corn and soybean or corn grain byproducts and industrial wastes is what they're mostly fed. The fibrous industrial waste. So that's the two types: is the concentrated feedlot, which you call factory farm, and then just regular farms, which the regular farm is where the animals are out grazing. That's the whole benefit of having all of that acreage, is that all these plants are out there growing. They grow when it rains. They seed themselves out. They go to seed. They're distributing their seeds around, and so there's a natural flora and fauna out there for these animals. Now, the animals that end up in the feedlot situation, the animals end up in your factory farms. Those came from the regular farms.
Even regenerative, like you would send your cows there for the slaughter
If
part.
if I don't have a customer that's willing to buy a regenerative cow or steer or meat, then yes, that's all. That's
Gotcha.
my last recourse.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to know because again, that's why I think not that this information will turn vegans not vegan or something, but I think it's good for vegans to know. Similar to how I thought crop deaths was just tractors getting mice. I thought, and most vegans, I believe, are under the idea that factory farming with feedlots are cows spending their entire lives in the feedlot. And
Right.
so even if it doesn't change them, it's information that should be known. Because like chickens, for example, from my understanding, and I could be very wrong, but I think chickens at very least have very miserable lives on factory farms, where cows, from my understanding of what you're saying, their lives aren't actually that miserable with factory farming. So if people wanted to be more moral and let's say they viewed chicken and beef as equally healthy, it seems like the moral choice to do would be to eat more beef and less chicken.
Well, yeah. I mean, you and I have agreed to that again and again since we've known each other. That you've said that eating grass-fed regenerative beef would be more vegan, so to speak, than say something with palm oil or soybeans in it. I don't know. Whatever you think would be very harmful and destructive to animals.
Yeah, it depends
But
on the
but it,
likely outcome.
but it's on the vegan menu anyway.
Um,
You know.
Yeah, which that reminds me, I wanted to comment on something you were saying about the seitan product, which is vital wheat gluten. Health is complicated, and I like to separate the ideas of health and morals. But my idea of health, so leaving animal products out, would just be whole foods. Whole foods, exactly how they grow, in the same way that every animal in the world eats just natural food that grows. It doesn't mean that because it's natural, it's good. So you can make something, you can process something and make it better. It's possible. I accept that it's possible. But anyways, so with seitan, basically the only ingredients are vital wheat gluten and water, and then you can add nutritional yeast if you want. And I've just heard from a handful of different places that since the only thing that's happening here is that it is basically protein extracted from wheat, and the rest of every other part of the wheat is gone, that there is a positive health aspect to it because of protein being good for you. I won't claim that this is right. I wouldn't tell somebody the healthy thing to do is to make seitan. I just found it to be delicious, and it seems to be less of a processed food than most processed foods that are in a box with like 20 ingredients.
Yeah. However, that gluten is an extract. So there was a lot of wheat that was involved in the production of that gluten. So the gluten was just a percentage of what was originally there in the whole food version, of the wheat when it was grown.
Mm.
Um, so they had to process it down. You have to look at how are these things. This is what I want the vegans to start doing. And I know they'll ignore me for the most part, but start looking into, like, for instance, if palm oil, if a large number of vegans don't think that palm oil is vegan for certain reasons, then maybe for similar reasons, the processing of wheat into wheat gluten might also be causing animal suffering and death.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the
Right.
complicated thing with the details of how something can be harmful at one time or one place, but not another time in another place. So to vegans,
Right. So when
e-
you
e-
kill the cow, it's harmful at the slaughterhouse. But when you
yeah.
serve the steak, it's not harmful there because you're actually feeding nutrition to living
No,
beings.
I got you, but I guess what I'm saying is that one's clear. Where something like look at arsenic in rice. So if you grow rice in certain areas, the majority of areas right now, for some reason, there's a lot of arsenic, and so right now, if you get rice grown in a certain place, it's probably not as healthy as whole brown rice could be in a future date or bought from a future grower in a different land where there's no arsenic. So you can only claim that the rice is bad in that specific time and place. So same thing with the palm oil. If you purchasing palm oil leads to a likely outcome of orangutans suffering and having horrible deaths and all these different things about slave labor all over, then maybe it's good to step back. But it doesn't mean that the product itself, palm oil, is immoral. So this is a thing that we should constantly be looking into, learning, and hoping that our governments can make good choices as well.
Yeah, the government's making good choices. We can hope for that. We've been hoping for that for a long time, haven't we?
Well,
But
speaking of governments, Jeremy in the comments was mentioning that you were saying something about that the governments or the powers that be want us to either be vegan or eat carnivore. And he was pointing out that he feels like they more likely want us to eat
mm,
fast food junk
yeah,
because of
I think that
subsidies.
that's a misrepresentation of that's taking me out of context, because what I said is outside of the standard diet. I said, remember, I said everyone can
Oh, okay.
everyone can agree that the standard American diet is garbage and is causing all this disease. But whenever it comes to alternatives to the standard American diet, they want us stuck in this false dichotomy of, okay, if we're going to go away from the standard American diet, then we have to choose carnivore or vegan.
Hmm.
And what I'm saying is that there's a healthy omnivore diet out there that causes the least amount of animal suffering and harm and leads to the best results of human health.
Do you think politicians are doing this though? Like the
I
push
think it's
for
corporations. Do you know what lobbying is? See,
yeah.
lobbying is like legal bribery. You're paying politicians to pursue legislation that would be friendly to your corporate profits. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, you haven't looked into it yet, but when you do, you'll see that corporations like Monsanto, Bayer, Pfizer, Kraft, General Mills, these are big, big money for politicians. And so, is it the government? Our government right now is kind of a quasi-fascist corporate entity. There's so much corporate involvement right now that the people really don't even have much of a say in
Hmm.
policy anymore. It's primarily corporations that are writing the legislation that politicians are coming up with. And so,
Yeah.
yes, we're living in an era of extreme political and corporate um, corruption. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're stuck in this false dichotomy outside the standard American diet, because that's what they want. They want infighting amongst us. They want because the carnivore diet, all meat, especially all muscle meat with no organ meats like liver, It's not ideal, but that's what the top carnivore influencers are pushing. Same thing with the vegans are not pushing the ideal vegan diet either. And in my mind, there is no any diet that requires supplementation of any kind cannot be deemed the healthiest diet. If it requires any supplementation, then the diet itself is it's got shortcomings. So that's the end of story. But the fact of the matter, yeah, look, look.
Let me just explain a hypothetical of why I strongly disagree with that. So you think it's good to get B12 from, say, ruminant animals? Well, let's say that something led to all ruminant animals either being destroyed and not existing anymore, or maybe let's say for some reason they stop having B12 in them, and that we find out the only way to get B12 for the rest of our lives is a supplement. And maybe it's due to human failure. Maybe we mess something up. But then I would say, obviously, at this point, the healthiest diet would be whatever, let's say you would call the healthiest diet, plus a B12 supplement, because in this hypothetical world, we couldn't get it anywhere else. So I don't think it's fair to push something out just indefinitely, you know?
Well, let's see. See if I'm going to share something with you real quick.
Okay.
See, I looked into the production of synthetic methylcobalamin and cyanocobalamin, and it requires a considerable amount of petroleum and coke. Are you familiar with coke in this context?
I don't think so.
Okay. This is a coke, a plant that's got coal ovens. So they have these big ovens where you heat the coal. You use petroleum to heat the coal. The coal, under certain conditions, changes and turns into something called coke, C-O-K-E, and it's used along with natural gas or methane in the production of synthetic vitamin B12. And so you're saying, what happens if all the animals are wiped out? Well, what happens when we run out of coal and we run out of all the petroleum that's used to make your B12? So we go ahead and get rid of all the animals that we rely on B12 from now. We let them go extinct like the vegans wish to happen. And then we rely on this type of B12. Now, what happens when this system breaks down or comes to the end of its life? Because, the earth is probably going to make more coal. It's probably going to make more oil. But as fast as we're using it, it's not. And if we go into a vegan world where we're now, instead of providing cobalt to cattle, and you know what? I've never provided cobalt to my cattle because around here the soil's got the right amount of cobalt in it, and so in most of the world, cobalt is not required as a supplement for cattle. In some places it is, but it's not in most of the places. So what you're saying is go ahead and get rid of all the livestock. Let's go ahead and put the human race 100% reliant upon this synthetic vitamin B12 that requires all these dirty factories and the towns where these factories are located, because these factories are always located around a town, is you've got cancer. The people are dying of cancer left and right in the towns that supply these coal factory, these coke ovens with labor.
Yeah. Well, let me say a couple things. So for one, I get my highest sources of B12 from oysters and mussels, which I would recommend other vegans do as well. just because I'm perfectly fine with eating bivalves. Now, again, like I don't know the details of what is sustainable. So if every human on Earth started eating bivalves for their B12 and nothing, and didn't use supplements or ruminant animals, maybe there wouldn't be enough bivalves to go around. So that there's always going to be a different level of discussion with what's sustainable. But even setting that aside, so just talking about what you're talking about, you might be completely right. And so this is some information that should get out. I would love to read up any articles on this because I like to take things one thing at a time. So maybe B12 could be the topic. If let's look at this here. But when we're done with this talk, if you could send me a couple links of this topic to my email, I'll read them over. I'll discuss them with friends, and then I'll come back and talk with you. Because if you're right, this is an important thing to think about.
Well, yeah, but this is just the problem is that this is one of a million things I want you to know, right?
Of course.
So yeah, this is one. Then we can get into the nutrients required. That right now there's so much pharmaceutical residue in human waste right now coming from the urine and the feces that is, and the same thing is happening with the livestock because they're eating contaminated feed, and so that's getting into our system, but the poisons that are getting into the food supply they're not being dealt with on the plant side or the meat side, right? When you go to the supermarket and you buy regular grocery store meat that's been fed in those concentrated feedlots that you don't like and I don't like, those are contaminated with things like the same pesticides that are plaguing the vegan diet, the glyphosate, for instance. But there's just so many different issues, such as what are the 3 nutrients that farmers usually put on their crops? What are they?
3 nutrients? Oh, I don't know. Nutrients that they put on their crops?
Right.
Well, I don't. Are you asking me? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus.
Oh, gotcha. Yes.
Right. I was debating a vegan, and the vegan said, well, if we get rid of the livestock, then we can just not rely on manure. We don't have to rely on these mined and synthetic nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We can just use human waste. And I never did get to tell him that that's already been ruled out because of all the pharmaceuticals that are in our urine, in human urine and feces right now.
Is that the only reason?
The only reason that we couldn't use human.
Yeah, I just happened to because I have a pretty big garden myself, and I know that like dog and cat feces can't be used as manure, but like guinea pig feces can. So I assumed it just depended on what was in the feces. So I wasn't sure, would human manure be all right if it wasn't for the pharmaceutical residues?
I think it would be all right. I don't think it's ideal.
Gotcha.
I don't think it's ideal. I think the ideal urine and manure is from ruminants.
Gotcha.
Because that's the way the system is set up. If you look in any science book and look up the carbon cycle, you'll see some type of ruminant in that picture, because the ruminants are the ones that have always grown into these giant 5 million head herds that move around the continent like an amoeba, always in search for fresh grass, always moving and always leaving behind a spot that's been well fertilized and set to explode with life after they move on.
Gotcha. Well, one thing I want to point out, because in the chat here, Zigzagzilla said because the food fed to cats and dogs, and that's why their feces.
I think that's part of it. Yeah.
What I'll say is this is a pretty extreme statement. I might lose some friends here, but I would rather a regenerative farm have a bunch of cows on it roaming around, just living a natural life, and then being killed for food, than have that same amount of dogs and cats owned by people that are feeding them the bullshit food that we give them, that the processed food that you get in stores for dogs and cats. If I could choose one of those two, I would much rather cows have a more natural diet and then die than having these dogs be. I would have to guess they're miserable. Dogs always seem happy, but it blows my mind that we feel comfortable taking this processed dog food and cat food and feeding them to dogs and cats.
Yeah, believe it or not, the dog and cat food has become more and more plant-based over the last 50 years.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I mean, you used to, back in the 70s, when you would buy like Alpo in a can for a dog,
Mm-hmm.
you could pour that out in the bowl and you would recognize animal parts in there.
Oh, interesting.
And now it's all it's mostly soybean meal, corn. It's mostly grains that they're feeding dogs and cats now.
Yeah. Oh, they probably want to be shelf stable. That they want more money, and most people are lazy, and so people would rather buy food that doesn't go bad. They don't want to have to open a can up and that kind of thing.
So naturally, cow manure and urine has the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have this issue when I grow. Sorry to cut you off. Like I was saying with my garden, all the fertilizers you can buy, whether they're organic or not or whatever, I recognize those three elements being the main elements that they have various ratios of. But I don't want to use fertilizers because I hear so many downsides to it. So for my garden, I just all my food waste I put into a compost pile that I do a cycle with, and then I use my compost. I don't know if farms can do this. They probably can't. They probably can't just use food scrap compost to grow a big farm. But I like to think that that's a better approach I'm taking than alternatives I could do.
So let's right now you don't have a replacement for livestock manure, correct?
Oh, for myself, for my garden, no.
Well, I mean, just do you have one in mind for a vegan world?
For a vegan world, nope. I'm perfectly fine with us using manure.
Okay, well, how would we fertilize with manure if we abolish livestock?
Okay, so if we didn't need manure, if we could just use composted food scraps or something like that we could discover is healthy that me and you would both agree on, then that would be the route to go. If we need something like manure, then we would do whatever is the least harmful way to get manure. If we have farms that have cows roaming on them and then we collect their manure, then that's what we got to do. We have to do something that will make us the healthiest we can be. Yeah,
I'm glad that you said that, because I know that you're at least consistent on this issue, because I've heard you say that before. As far as like chasing after animals and collecting the manure out in nature, well, now you're going to be harming the animals that are in that nature, because those animals require that manure to be laid down there, because that manure would feed the plants that would eventually feed them, right? So there's this carbon cycle, and what you're saying is that we we interrupt the carbon cycle in nature so that we can replace the lack of a carbon cycle in our crop agriculture because we divorced it from livestock agriculture. Because up until the Industrial Revolution, livestock agriculture and crop agriculture were always married together because they work perfectly together. You can mimic the natural systems and make a really healthy ecosystem that produces a lot of healthy plant foods and a lot of healthy animal foods. And that's the really great way of doing it. But when you try to remove the plant agriculture from the livestock and remove the livestock from the plant agriculture, well, now what you've got is you've got two dead end streets because you're interrupting these carbon cycles, and there is no solution. You think that you've got a solution because we can go out there with a shovel chasing after these bison in the field to collect the manure for our crops. But that, number one, you'd expend so much energy doing that you'd have to calculate that into the algorithm. And then also the fact that now you've removed the manure, and you seem to be confused about that. To me, it's odd that people are so they're not educated enough about ecology to know that those ruminant animals, their manure and all of that, play a large role in the healthy cycles and ecosystem has got going on inside of it. So removing that manure from the wild animals' habitats so that you now can use it in your crops. Now you're just, again, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're still harming animals. It's just not the ones that you eat. It's the ones whose environment you're degrading because you won't allow any manure to enter the soil. And that's another thing is that you, going back to your other comment was, and I was telling you that the ruminant manure is ideal for those environments on purpose. That's the way the system's set up. The soil in a wild area, the soil, really any healthy soil is going to have a lot of bacteria, microorganisms in it. Mm-hmm. Those microorganisms are the same microorganisms that you find in a healthy cow rumen. So there's a give and take. The grasslands feed the ruminant population and the cows, and as the cows are grazing and their saliva is dripping off on the ground, they're also planting bacteria and other microorganisms into the soil. So there's this give and take between the ruminants and the soil. Everything depends on the soil. All the animals' well-being relies on healthy soil. So if you're going to get rid of the livestock, if you think the first thing you need to do is just go vegan, let's get rid of livestock. And once we abolish all livestock, then we'll get our bearings and figure out what we need to do next. But what you're doing there, what vegans are doing there, is they're painting mankind into a corner because there's problems that you haven't worked out yet. Like, how are you going to replace these nutrients? How are you going to replace the nitrogen? How are you going to replace the phosphorus and the potassium? Right now, the synthetic version of nitrogen is producing more methane than all other industrial, 20 times more than the other industrial production combined. So it's not in the cattle, the ruminant methane has always been here, but this nitrogen methane is being manufactured using methane to heat and using methane to change it into nitrogen to make a synthetic nitrogen that they can use for fertilizer. The potassium is mined. Right here's the you see on the screen. You see that big mountain back there?
Yes.
That's a phosphogypsum stack. If you were to see a giant dump truck driving along the bottom of that mountain, it would look like an ant because that is a huge phosphogypsum stack. Do you know what a phosphogypsum stack is?
I don't know.
So when they mine phosphorus, if you've got a crop farmer that refuses to buy manure from a cattle operation, and insists on buying these synthetic nutrients, which most crop farmers do, then that as far as the phosphorus is concerned, that comes from phosphorus mines. And so they use these giant machines to destroy the earth, and they pull it up and they extract a little bit of phosphorus from it, and then they got this stuff left over, and that's what goes into these phosphogypsum stacks. It's radioactive because this ground here, where everywhere where phosphorus is mined, what's left over, this waste product, is radioactive because it's got radioactive properties, radioactive particles in it. And that's the case for all of these phosphorus.
It becomes radioactive because of removing the phosphorus?
It becomes more radioactive. It already had radioactive particles, but when you remove something, like if you were to, you had, a jar of buttons, and you remove all the blue ones, now your jar of buttons is going to be smaller, right? Because you remove the blue buttons out, and so the leftover buttons that you don't want, there's a smaller so now the red ones are more concentrated, right?
Gotcha.
It leaves the radioactivity more concentrated, and it's also acidic. And so you see on top this giant lake, because when it rains, they've created a wall to prevent this radioactive acidic runoff. They don't want it getting into the streams and the rivers, although it happens all the time. They at least try to keep it contained, but it's always breaching the wall. And over, they've had, like in Florida, that water is acidic, and it eats a hole all the way down through the bedrock into the aquifer, and then all of that radioactive water goes right down the drain. And now people in Florida are drinking contaminated drinking water.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I was going to ask, I think you just answered the question for me, but I was going to ask you, because a couple people in chat were asking what the point is being made here, and pointing out that it's not vegan related, which I would say, if doing this act that you're showing here leads to suffering of animals, it's vegan related. If it leads to suffering of people, it's bad either way, whether it's vegan or not. So you are pointing out that doing this phosphorus mining leads to runoff that goes into drinking water and affects humans.
See, I told you I had a million things I wanted to tell you, and this was one of them. This was just another one of them. And vegans can sit there and say, blah, crop deaths are lame, let's don't talk about this. What does this got to do with veganism? Well, the fact is that vegan work, lots of these are going to be required in a vegan world. And those mines are eventually going to run out of phosphorus. There's only a finite amount of mineable phosphorus on the surface of the earth. It's not just like this infinite fountain of phosphorus coming out for a vegan world. You have to constantly mine this stuff out of the ground. And, you're looking at a photograph, that photograph there on the right of that phosphogypsum stack. That's a photograph from miles away. That's 2 or 3 miles. Maybe more. And do you really think that you can cause an environmental Goliath, a environmental Goliath of a catastrophe like that, and not harm animals? See, if you give me a little bit more time on this subject, I'll show you what happens to the animals that live around these stacks.
Yeah, and here's the thing.
No, hold on. Yeah. We're talking about the runoff getting into humans, and vegans don't really care much about humans. You say you do, but you said that it would run off and eventually the humans would drink it. But that gives vegans an excuse, because they say, oh, it's harming the humans. Who cares? Well, before the humans drink it, guess where that runoff goes to? It goes to the local streams where the local fish are dying. Have you ever heard of a fish kill? A phosphogypsum fish kill?
Oh, I haven't, no.
Yeah. Imagine a huge river choked with dead fish, where the dead fish are so thick you can't even see the water for miles. Gotcha. And that's the kind of of animal death and suffering that is happening, and it's out of sight, out of mind for vegans. And I'm hoping that you will be the one vegan that will not become crop deathsphobic and run from learning the million different ways that I want you to know that the crops that fuel veganism, the crops that are on the vegan menu, they rely on these phosphogypsum stacks. And the more veganism you have, the more of this phosphogypsum stack you're going to have. And the same is true for the potassium. The same is true for the nitrogen. All of these nutrients that have to be applied to the crops are causing gargantuan amounts of animal suffering and death. And today we're just getting into the initial, very shallow introduction of just the phosphogypsum stacks.
Yeah.
And I've got a million more big ones for you too.
Well, one thing I want to point out that I think is cool. I mean, I'm just seeing this image you have up here, but it says there's 2 lawsuits, and it involves endangering 31 species. I love that that there are lawsuits brought up, and it would be interesting to see the outcome. I want to look into that further. But would you say that part of our issues with any of this stuff is that we are overpopulated? Is like if we had half the amount of humans on Earth, would we have more availability to use? We'd need less manure, but we could use manure. We could use compost from food scraps. Somebody pointed out in here that there's phosphorus in plants, and so I don't know if it'd just be food scraps or growing like fields that would lead to creating compost if we had less people. What do you think?
No, because right now we've got almost all of the arable land is being used right now, and a lot of it is being used to grow things like ethanol corn. Okay, ethanol corn. Ethanol is a net. Look into it. You'll see that ethanol is a net loss fuel. In other words, you've got to burn more diesel. You've got to cause more carbon. I don't know if you remember me talking about it before, but tilling the soil robs it of carbon. Yeah. Because it causes what's called a bacterial bloom. And when those bacteria bloom like that, which is similar to a red tide, but in the soil, all of this carbon is released into the atmosphere. And I don't believe too much in the climate change caused by atmospheric carbon. But what I do know is that pilots will tell you that when they fly over like large swaths of corn and soybeans, that there's a lot of turbulence. And that's because that bare soil is causing hot convection currents that blow straight up into the atmosphere, and they'll blow away clouds. Would-be precipitation events don't happen because that hot surface of that plowed up ground that's now hydrophobic because it doesn't contain any carbon anymore. So all of these details, you shouldn't be sifting out all of this information after you mandate veganism, but get all these details figured out before, because some of the people that you will harm through, say, let's say we put all the power in your hands today, and what you want to happen will happen, and you enact a global vegan mandate before weeding all of this stuff out. And then we get the next day, and all of a sudden you do the math and figure out that, wow, we're without livestock, we are going to have a global famine, and 90% of the population is going to be wiped out. Now, would you on the one hand, would you say that's good because we're overpopulated, or would you say that's horrible, no one should leave me alone around their children?
Yeah. I would, if I could press buttons and magically know everything, I would want whatever would lead to the least amount of human suffering. And then after that, I would want to also lead to the least amount of other suffering outside of that. And so if I was given control today, obviously I would know almost nothing and not be able to put good things in place. But what I would put in place and I would hope I wouldn't be wrong about it, would be mandatory laws about factory farming. It would include things like the amount of space that pigs are crammed into. It would include things like smashing pigs to death when they're runts. It would include things like just any kind of violence that isn't necessary. And it would lead to more of a world of regenerative farming or something like that until I knew more.
On a similar note, what about this? We know that crop agriculture causes runoff of toxic agrochemicals that cause fish kills. Where, let's say, the large portion of the Mississippi River is choked full of dead fish, just packed in there so that you can't even see the water. Should there be some kind of law for crop agriculture as well, so that when they kill that many fish, they don't get choked up so close together, right? Because it seems to be the close up together stuff that you don't like.
Well, no, if I could be
Let me
shown
show
the
you
amount
what
of
I'm talking
suffering,
about.
yeah, definitely do.
Yeah.
If I could be shown the amount of suffering, then I would want those things outlawed as much as possible as well. It really is going to just come down to what we need for survival. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. Really quick before you show me that, I'm curious what your response to this is. Chris Hines says phosphorus is literally fed to cattle. What do you think he means by that?
I don't know. I have cattle and I've never fed them phosphorus. I'm not sure what he's talking about.
Okay, maybe he means because there's phosphorus in plants, that the plants that are fed to them, and therefore we could just make compost out of plants. But yeah, I don't know.
Right. But the number of plants that are grown specifically for animals are in the minority.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
Like,
it seems like a lot of work to grow plants just to make fertilizer, just from a guess.
yeah, it becomes one of those situations like we were talking about earlier with the organic pesticide. The organic pesticide was being extracted from an inorganic crop, right? And so you've got the vegan saying, or anyone that's saying, I'm not, I buy organic, therefore I'm not responsible for any animal deaths. Well, not only do those pesticides kill directly, but they were extracted from a crop that is just conventional agriculture. It's just same old. Because when we talk about factory, you say factory farms. What I see are these giant John Deere tractors pulling those big agrochemical sprayers, and all of the machinery that's involved in that hardcore destructive crop agriculture that provides most of the items. Most of the items on the vegan menu come from that type of agriculture. So when you say factory farms, that's what I see. And I have to remember that you don't think about crop farmers as farmers. You only think of livestock farmers as farmers.
It's just more complicated, so it takes more effort to look into. So it's not that I don't think it; it's just that it's harder to know. But I think you're right. I want to know it, which is why I'm talking to you about it. But I can see a bunch of pigs crammed into a cage, and unless I'm shown like some scientific evidence that pigs enjoy being crammed into a cage, it's easy to say there should be a law that changes the size of the cage or something like that. Now, the details of putting fertilizers or putting pesticides onto crops and that running into rivers and lakes and stuff, that's just something that takes looking up, and I'm glad we're going to do that together. Chris Hines says, no, it's a supplemented mineral, not from plants. So I wonder how many, what percentage of livestock is fed this phosphorus mineral? Because that would play a part, right? Like you don't think that phosphorus should be fed as a supplement to livestock, correct?
I think that livestock should be raised in a region that will raise them. So,
okay, yeah.
if in other words, the bison, let's say hypothetically that somewhere in Minnesota, some guy's grazing his cattle on a piece of land that is deficient in phosphorus, and he's supplementing mined phosphorus to his cattle. That what that would be the case. That would be a case of degraded soil, because we know that the bison that were really, I mean, huge herds of bison roaming around the North American continent before the Industrial Revolution, um, they didn't require supplementation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, wild ruminants. I mean, are we supplementing the deer, the wild deer population? There's 25 million head of wild deer in continental United States. Are we giving them supplements?
No, no. Well,
No.
I think the idea
Yeah.
is that similar. Basically, I think Chris is wanting you to say that it would be wrong to if you eat a cow that was farmed in a place where they're giving phosphorus supplements. It's sort of similar to eating vegan food that has these chemicals sprayed on them.
Right.
So you have to accept that.
Here's the difference. Here's the
Okay.
difference. Okay. The difference is that what I said earlier is that as soon as you separated plant agriculture from crop agriculture, both sides go down in quality. Both sides go down in quality. So
Okay.
the cattle are part of the natural carbon cycle, phosphate cycle, potassium cycle, all of these different nutrients, and they have cycles to them. The cow doesn't just take, the cow also gives, right? When a cow is out there urinating and manuring all over the place in a field, that field loves that. The soil in that field thrives under those conditions. And any potassium that's in the cow's system, some of it is going to be deposited back into the soil. But when you remove the cow from the picture, you say, okay, we're just going to grow soybeans here. Well, those soybeans don't give back to the soil. They don't give potassium back to the soil. All of that nutrition is harvested in the soybean, and that's taken for processing. And so the crop agriculture will always require a phosphorus, no matter where you grow it. It will always require a supplement. Whereas for the ruminants, there are places on Earth that the soil still hasn't been degraded, where that type of supplementation is not required and would never be required, because it's a cycle. Cycles are infinite. It's like a circle. It just keeps going around and around and around.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. Again, I'm not an expert, but what you're saying makes sense to me. I want to hear counters to what you're saying, and I want to hear more evidence of what you're saying, and I like the idea of learning about it.
Okay.
I do have to hop off here in a sec, but I do want to hear a little bit about this. I can read this a little bit, but I see some things about chemical spills. Now, are most of what we're seeing here spills like accidental spills or intentional spraying of land?
Intentional spraying of land.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Are there chemical spills that are not agricultural related that also kill fish? Yes, but not near as prevalent, because when they spray these chemicals on the crops that provide the items on the vegan menu, these chemicals, when it rains, a little bit of it soaks in, but most of it runs off into the streams, tributaries, and rivers. And so, yeah, look, PEI probes fish kill in river with record pesticide runoff. Okay, that's agriculture. Okay, so these are.
Now, what is done about this? So this can be something that's known. I see people there. Are they trying to fix this? The company that the runoff is from, do they get a fine or anything?
Look, this is not a company or a. Let me show you something. The Mississippi River. Hold on a sec. Let me pull this up.
Yeah, and then also, if you don't mind me asking while you're pulling that up, the chemical you told me about this morning, the pyrethrin,
Yeah.
um, is that included in the spillover effect, or is that one that has harms but not with runoffs?
No, it also causes runoff. It'll
Okay.
anything in the water it'll kill.
Okay, so your preferred method of you don't just do carnivore, right? You do something probably more like a paleo, like
Yeah.
you eat
Yeah.
produce. Your preferred method, because I don't think you grow your own food. Do you prefer just local organic farms that do like Saturday markets, or do you kind of do the best of two evils and pick between the organic or non-organic that involve pesticides for
Yeah.
yourself?
I never buy non-organic. I
Okay.
never buy non-organic. It's simply because um, the harm that's done to the environment, the animals, and human health is going to be a larger number than with conventional agriculture than with organic. But
Eh,
but I'm not going to fool myself, kid myself into thinking that organic produce means that I'm not responsible for any fish kill, or the food that I'm eating is not associated with any fish kills or any other animal suffering and harm that's happening out there.
For
Just
sure.
because it's so-called organic doesn't mean that but it does mean that except in the case of like this one that we were just talking about, the pyrethrin, is that you've got a hidden layer of conventional agriculture behind that pesticide. You've got to produce plants conventionally in order to have this so-called organic pesticide. So
Okay, so what would okay, let's say that there was an organic farm that you chose to get food from them instead of the ones that are not organic. But if you were to make them more ideal to what you want, and you had them remove the paranthrian, I wish I could pronounce that, would you replace that with the idea of um, manure? Are they not using manure? Is that the problem?
what? You mean the 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 non-organic produce?
No, the organic one. So you're saying you prefer organic, but then the organic does have the pyrethrin thing. Um, can wh- can they replace that? Can are they using pyrethrin and manure, or is the pyrethrin like a synthetic replacement for something that's in the manure?
Okay, the pyrethrin is a pesticide. Okay, the the
Mm.
the soil, the microorganisms that live in healthy soil, because you see, the microorganisms that live in healthy soil have a symbiotic relationship with the plants they whose roots they grow amongst, and so there's this give and take. There's a nitrogen fixing bacteria that will provide nitrogen to plants if those bacteria are in the soil. That's one of the reasons why we have to spray crops with synthetic nitrogen, because we've
Mm.
killed everything in the soil, and that normal ecosystem, that normal uh, zoo of life that would be in the soil, that would be feeding nutrients to the roots of these plants, they're
Hmm.
dead. That crop agriculture has killed all of that. So the soil is sterile, and so all of these things that would be naturally taken care of beneath the soil, provided to the plant by the bacteria, now they've got to be provided by the farmer by spraying it on the crop, hoping that when it rains, a little bit of it will soak into the soil so that the roots can absorb it. But if you've ever been outside in a heavy rain, a lot of that, it makes sense that a lot of that would run down into the river,
Hmm.
and it does. And when that happens, you have these giant fish kills. Now, what you see there on the screen is the Mississippi River. Now, you see,
Mm-hmm.
I can't look at both screens simultaneously, but can you see my cursor on there?
Yeah.
Okay, so this dark line right here is the Mississippi River.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these other little lines are smaller rivers. We call them tributaries. They catch runoff and they feed it into the Mississippi River, and then the Mississippi River dumps it into the Gulf of Mexico down here.
Okay.
Well, all of the land around these tributaries right here, it's all of it corn and soybean. And so all of those agrochemicals are when it rains hard, it gets washed off into these tributaries. The tributaries carry it to the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River dumps all of those agrochemicals into the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have a oceanic dead zone. And we have those crop-caused oceanic dead zones all over the world now. There's like almost 100,000 square miles of oceanic dead zone. And that 100,000 square miles, you're talking about just a two-dimensional space, but the ocean is three-dimensional. You're talking about a lot of depth, and with each foot down, you're going to be introduced to a different species, different groups of species that would die. And so this is, just another example of how crops are causing environmental destruction, ecological havoc, animal death and suffering. And you're the first vegan that would sit down with me, Carson. And I commend you for having the balls to look at this, because people like Jeffrey Phillips and his little international crew, they don't want to look at this. They do not want people looking at it. And these are when you look at a swath. I mean, this is where the pesticide. You think you can spray an area the size of this right here with pesticides and not harm an animal? No, we're driving songbirds into extinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. I'm going to guarantee you this. If what you're saying is accurate, which I'm sure a lot of it is, if vegans, Jeffrey Phillips included, Chris Hines, all these guys, buddies of mine, if they knew what you're saying was accurate, I think they would want it too. It's just going to come down to finding out if it's true and what to compare it to. So I just want to point that out. But I do want to ask you, when you were talking about the runoffs that go to the Mississippi and then in the Gulf of Mexico, would you say that like 90%, 95% of that is from non-organic crops? You said it's mostly corn and soy, and I'm guessing it's also mostly non-organic, correct?
Yeah, like somewhere between 95% and 99% of the crops that people are eating are not organic. Yeah, they're being fertilized with synthetic nitrogen.
So in a hypothetical world where all vegans only ate organic and they didn't go near any processed foods that had non-organic corn or soy at all, and they just stayed away from it, would you say that, well, first of all, I guess we could assume that the amount of those crops existing would decrease some. You might say a lot, but we can say at least some. Would you say that you are now less concerned if that were to come true, if vegans stopped consuming those two products?
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're misreading my concern.
Oh, no. I'm just throwing out some ideas to take an idea and to push it a little further and to see how we feel about it. I see your concern no matter what. The concern is that we shouldn't be spraying pesticides that can have runoff that can lead to the suffering and destruction of animals. And I agree with you.
Yeah, and not just that, Carson, and not just that. I don't think that, for instance, the grams of protein that you would have to abolish by abolishing animal agriculture globally is gargantuan, and it would have to be replaced. all of those grams of protein would have to be replaced. Jeffrey Phillips will tell you that he can get enough protein from broccoli, from just a little bit of broccoli. But I'm telling you right now that broccoli, the digestibility of the protein in broccoli is maybe 1%.
Gotcha.
You can't get protein from broccoli. If you could, not enough to keep
Yeah.
yourself from.
Well, I'd prefer to stay away from the nutrient side of it, just for right now. That is a topic it'd be cool to get into. I want to ask you one last thing, just from me to you personally, before hopping off here, and you can ask me another thing too if you want. But I was curious. Do you think that there is something that organic farmers could and should be doing that would be sustainable? If we replaced all farming of crops with organic farming, would you think that they should remove the pyrethrin? I'm going to learn that one day. Should they replace that with something else, or is that kind of the best we have?
What we know about pests is that if you really want a lot of pests and you really want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be relying on some type of pesticide or some type of crop protection measure, then go with a monocropping system. A monocropping system is one where livestock has been removed and every other plant has been removed. So you might have, like in the Midwest, where I was showing you the Mississippi River, you might have 10,000 square miles of nothing but corn. Well, what about just one blade of grass? No, just corn. That's all they want. It's a monocrop. Mono means one. So anytime you cut down all the plants and you leave just one, well, now all of those synergistic and reciprocating relationships that certain plants have with each other is gone. And so what we find is that, like, you look into a farmer by the name of Gabe Brown, and he found that whenever he got away from monocropping, where he's planting more than one species in a field, then the number of pests dramatically go down. So the more species, the further away from monocropping you can get, and the more number of different kinds of plants that you can grow in the same field at the same time, then the fewer pesticides you have to use, because some of those crops have natural, they avert pests naturally. They have natural pest defenses that aren't harmful to the environment and harmful to human health and harmful to the surrounding animals that live in that area. Right?
Yeah, I've learned that with gardening, because you have different companion plants that the smell of one plant will make insects stay away from the other plant. That's a good point. And So are you saying that the monocropping happens with organic and non-organic? Just kind of a lot of people do it, and the best thing that organic farmers can do is to stay away from that monocropping. Would that make it so they would need none of the pyrethrin, or just less?
There's no way for me to guess. I would only be guessing because these are experiments that would have to be carried out. There are farmers out there that have published papers on this subject, and you will always see a decrease in the need in pesticides and other crop protection measures. But if each case is going to have its own fingerprint, it's going to have its own numbers that are specific to its soil, its climate, its precipitation, annual precipitation, etc. Gotcha. And there's just a bunch of different elements that would go into how much pesticide might be required. But yeah, what we should be shooting for is the largest decrease. But in order to do that, you'd also have to not just bring in more plant species. You would need to bring livestock back into the picture, and allow the natural, foraging animal / plant cycles to exist again, so you don't have to rely upon all of this petroleum, methane, I'll give you an example real quick before you go.
Mm-hmm.
I probably showed you this before.
And then while you're looking that up, I just want to ask you one thing, because
Yeah.
so I think we plan on doing talks like once a week or something, which I think will be great. I'm going to gather as much information as I can from you and make lists of things that I've learned, have sources and whatnot. My request to you, because I like to take things one at a time, I would love to research this B12 thing that you brought up in this talk. And I would love for that to be our next talk. If you are up for it and could send me the article that you brought up when we were talking and maybe a couple others, if you could send it my way, I will just heavily focus on that topic and try to find the counter arguments to it. And then what I would like for our second talk would be to be a heavy focus on the runoffs. That's a very interesting topic to me, and I would love to do those two in that order if you're up for it.
What is it that you want me to provide you about the B12?
You were showing me an up above factory showing that there are things that lead to cancers and the various issues that happen from making B12 supplements. So I want to do a deep dive into finding out if there are any positive approaches to making B12 supplements, how bad the industry of B12 supplements is, and that kind of thing, and put a heavy focus into that real quick for one specific B12 talk, and then for a separate talk, I'd want to research the runoffs and just put a heavy focus into the runoff.
Okay. The here are the things that I learned about B12. One is B12 is made from bacteria, right? And bacteria has to have a medium to grow in. There's two mediums that I've found so far that they use to grow bacteria or cyanobacteria in, and that's one of them was milk, and the other one was poultry manure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I also learned that they use a lot of heat. Then I had to look that up and find out that the heat is generated through burning methane, and that there was ingredients in the manufacture of B12 that require coke. I didn't even know what coke was. I looked it up, and that's when I learned about the coke ovens where they burn the coal and everything to make the coke in order to make the B12. Long story short is that this was the result of me spending months just coming up with every different source that I could that would give me information on how vitamin B12 is manufactured. I couldn't find all of that information in one place. And so what you're asking me basically is to give you a book of information that I was able to that I was able to acquire after combing for months and months through scientific papers, different corporations manufacturing literature. It's not, they don't have any, it's just like we want to know how many animals are killed by these phosphogypsum stacks. Well, right now, no one's done a study on that. We don't know. That's where you and I would come in to either do it ourselves or at least come up with an idea, come up with we don't even have to have a ballpark figure. But if we become conscious of a way that animals are dying for crop agriculture, then now we at least know that it's the number is higher than the number of deer that are killed in Oregon off of crop protection permits. So
Yeah.
There's some of the things that I can tell you are I can go find one source for, but there's a lot of the things that I can tell you that are factual that you would have to look up yourself, or you would have to allow me to write a book to give it to you.
Gotcha.
So that all of these little details can be, because it sounds to me what you're doing is you're challenging the idea that coal or coke or petroleum is required to make vitamin B12. So what I would challenge you to do is for you to find a manufacturing process for vitamin B12 that does not require petroleum, coal, or coke.
For sure. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily challenging it just yet, but yes, that's how I view almost any possible topic. If I can know a possible outcome or idea on a topic, then the most important thing to me is to hear the other side of it. I think you don't really know something unless you know all the sides of it. So before I can find if there is a supplement company that doesn't use one of the things you just listed, I want to look at the findings for why those things are bad. I want to look at the findings for what this Coke is. And then after I read that, then I want to go and do what you just said. And I'll keep going to each counter. It's not to prove one necessarily. It's to find the truth. And yeah, we can take it one step at a time. If you're saying that there's only like one study that you can send and then the rest would be like putting together a book, that's fine. I get that. I don't want you to put together a book necessarily. I would want to read the one study you're talking about, and then aside from that, you could just
I'm not talking about a study. That's what you're going to have to eventually learn about me, is that the things that I talk about, not everything I've got has a study that goes with it. Mm-hmm. Right? In order to have a study, you've got to have a corporation that's willing to spend the money on that study. Like, has there been a study? Right now, there's a blacktop that will join my house to your house. I can drive from where I live to your address, and I'll stay on a paved road the whole way. And there's going to be a certain, it's a given that there's going to be a certain amount of litter in the bar ditch that I will see on my way. People throw their trash out on the road, and I'm going to see a certain amount of litter, and I'm going to pass some number of aluminum cans that are in the bar ditch while I'm driving to your house.
Correct.
And that's a fact. Do I have a study that says that there's going to be aluminum cans between JD's house and Carson's house? No. There's not a study that says that, but we can look at the situation and we can deem the fact is that, yes, there's going to be a respectable amount of aluminum cans as trash in the bar ditches on the road to Carson's house. And it doesn't require a study.
Yes, correct. So sometimes I might say study, and I might mean various different things. Like a study would be good if it's there, and if not, an article, an essay on it, just something to get me started. Because if I hear an idea from someone about something, I can know that they made a claim. It doesn't mean that your claim is wrong or anything. It just means that once that claim's made, now I want to know more about it. If somebody shows me a dead bird and says this bird died because it ate a bug that died from pesticides, so that killed the bird, I would want to know if that's true. I would want to know, like, was this bird studied to see if it had pesticide residue inside of it? And if it was, then we would have that information. We would know where this bird died, what it died from, and these different things. Hearing assumptions is good too. We can go off of that. I just want to learn as much as I can, and I would need to do something that I would call learning. Right now, I'm hearing opinions. And I'm hearing hypothesis, and I'm creating my own hypothesis. And now I want to test that. I want to see what I can read and make people aware. And I think you probably agree with me that the more me and you make people aware of the things you're talking about, the more people are likely to do studies in the future when the funding is there.
Yeah, I really don't think that the funding is going to be there for a lot of this stuff, because there's no the entities that would be funding these types of studies. They don't have any financial interest in it. I mean, I wish that we lived in that world where these studies are all on the up and up. All conflicts of interest have been disclosed, and the study is being done solely for the betterment of humankind. But we live in this world where the corporations are doing what's best for their bottom line, and so this idea that if you and I talk about it, or if the people demand it, maybe they'll do a crop death study. Well, no, they're not going to do a crop death study, because they want people to transition to at least a plant-based diet, if not a vegan diet. And that includes the meat packers. The meat packers are right now in transition. Are you aware of the transition that the meat packers are going through right now?
No.
Okay. The meat packers have traditionally been a meat company, right? Do they sell protein? Yes. Do they sell plant protein? No, they sell meat. They're meat companies. Well, they're transitioning right now to protein companies. A protein company can sell you protein as meat, soy protein isolate, pea protein isolate. So there's the profit margin in plant-derived proteins is higher, largely because of the subsidies, but it's still higher for plant-based protein than it is for animal protein. And then, you look into you don't believe that a vegan diet is malnourishing or deficient in vitamins and minerals, but there are scientists and doctors that do believe that, including myself. So you've got to factor in, not just the harm that happens on the shallow layer, but through all of the nutritional deficiencies that would come along with a vegan world as well, that would have to be accounted for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to look into all of it. There has to be. You believe in truth, right? We have to be able to find the truth by finding it. There has to be something. Now, it's a bummer if there is a likely truth out there that isn't researched and there aren't studies for. But there needs to be something to convince somebody of something. So if you're convinced of the things you're talking about, then hopefully when I see what you've seen, I'll be convinced. Now, the things that might take a book's worth of whatever, we might not have all the time for that. But I think we'll have the time for a lot of these different things. And it just... there has to be something. I can't just hear an idea. Like, for example, are you pro police? Like,
Am I pro?
Just generically, like are you pro police officers? Are you
I'm
in support of them?
I'm in support of law-abiding police officers. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so I am too, and so but what it would take to get me to feel like the majority of police are corrupt or something like that would be findings. We would have to look, so we can look at stats. We can see how many times has an officer shot a suspect. How many times did that suspect have a weapon? And we can look at exact stats of what is known, and we can look at body cam footage. We can look at cell phone footage. We can look at all these different things and break it down and go like, okay, this is on the up and up. We got this all figured out. If anybody has any theory that there's some wrongdoing, then hopefully we can send somebody in to find out, set up cameras in a place or something like that. And I'm not just going to hear, 80% of police officers are racist, and then I'll go tell people 80% of police officers are racist. Somebody would have to show me that information.
Carson, the problem
Mhm.
with what you're saying is that it doesn't. When I look at you and I look at other subjects regarding you, then then what you're saying right now does not hold true. For instance, I taught you today that the concentrated feedlot, what you call a factory farm, that's the last 3 months of a cow's life. Before that, they're grazing on pasture. You didn't know
Uh,
that before because you took the word of a vegan influencer and you ran with it. You didn't double check. You didn't make him prove it. You didn't even have it. And right now, all you've had was me tell you that wasn't the case. That they're not raised. These cows aren't born and raised in a factory farm.
yeah. Well, let me correct you real quick. Because there are assumptions and then there's acceptance. When I thought that crop deaths was just the mice plowed over with tractors, it's not because somebody told me that and then I just accepted it. It's because that was my assumption without further information. Same thing would go with the feedlot things. I don't know what led me to feel what I felt, but I read the smallest amount of things that made me know what a feedlot looks like, and then I assumed that was their entire lives. Now, I was wrong about that, and just like I can't research every single thing in the world like rocket science, I was unaware of that, and I'm assuming you are correct, and let's just go with the idea that you are correct, because I truly believe you're likely correct, and I'll find out in 5 minutes when we're done talking that it is the last 3 months of their lives, and now I know this. But it's not that I thought the other thing because I assumed or because I accepted and ran with it. I just had an assumption, and I usually don't make claims off of some assumptions. I'm not going around telling everybody a cow spends every second of its life here. I usually will only tell the information I know to be true, and then the rest of it I'll say, if this, then this.
Yeah, I think that again, right now, if you were going to err on one side or the other, you're going to say, okay, the crops that provide human goods kill more animals, cause more animal death and suffering than all of animal agriculture. You have no, you can't. It's just like this. If you're going to declare one number to be larger or smaller than another number, then what are the two data points that you need to know before you can make that declaration?
Oh, I'm not sure. That's a complicated question.
Not really. If you're going
Okay.
to, if let's say you've got two numbers, and one of them is 11, and the other one is 6.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? You right now you have enough information to tell me which one of those numbers is higher, right?
Correct. Yes.
So how many data points did you need to come to that conclusion that 11 is higher than 6?
Oh, if I'm going off of the idea of which thing causes more suffering, and then all I would need to know is the number. The
Right.
number of units of suffering. Yeah.
Right. So right now you have a general idea of suffering because we catalog all of the deaths that come along with animal agriculture, right? We care enough about those animals to at least make the death as quick as possible, and it's cataloged. That's why you can say, well, 70 billion land animals die from animal agriculture every year. How do you know that? Because we counted them. We animal agriculture people counted them. Now, if we try to get the same, what's the number that's caused number of animal suffering and death from crop agriculture? Right now, you have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Because when we first met, you thought it was just a mouse here and there that was too stupid or too slow to get out of the way of the tractors. And now
Right.
you know that whoa, it's also deer. Oh, whoa, it's also dolphins. Oh, you mean manatees and elephants and koalas
Mhm.
and monkeys and
The-
bears and tigers, and all of these are crop deaths? I didn't know that. So in other words, you've got one number that's it. You've got some idea of the amount of animal death associated with animal agriculture, but the animal suffering and death that comes along with the crops that provide the items on the vegan menu, you don't have any idea what those are. I mean,
Correct.
you've learned today what you've learned about the phosphogypsum stacks, fish kills that are associated with that, and that's just one. The fish kills are just the beginning. There's also birds that are
Yeah.
harmed. There are reptiles that are harmed. So, what else? The Mississippi River, amongst all of those corn and
Yeah.
soybeans, with the oceanic dead zones.
Well,
Those oceanic dead zones are on your plate. They're on your
Well,
plate.
I want to point out a couple things real quick. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Now, I don't know for sure. I don't even know to my own satisfaction how to feel about the phosphorus mines because I saw what you pointed out. And I'm assuming you're probably right. And if you send me some links to that, and I can verify and try to do some like cross examination, then I'll probably put myself in the category of leaning towards feeling that way. Right now, I just have the giving you the benefit of the doubt, and I think you are telling me the truth. I don't think
What
you're
is it?
lying
What
to me
is
at all.
what is it that you're taking? That you're giving me the benefit of the doubt about?
Everything you're saying today, because we're having a conversation, and it's not anything that I've looked up in a way where I will feel confident about it yet. I want to look into the things that you're reading, and then feel how I feel about them. But no, I'm not calling you wrong on any of it. But I do want to clarify something really quick. If we're talking about harm versus harm of crop agriculture versus animal agriculture, I don't even really care too much about the animal deaths. It's
You
really
only care about the animal suffering,
the
right?
suffering. So even in the
Right.
animal agriculture, now I don't think we need to kill them
Which is
necessarily, or
weird
as many
because
as we do. But
it's weird because I saw you had another guy, another opponent, anti-vegan, so to speak, on your channel, and he was bringing up the birds, and you were stuck on the 67 million bird deaths,
mhm.
but that same study explained that 670 million birds are actually harmed and suffer because of the pesticides. So I was curious why you were focused on the 67 million deaths of birds caused by the pesticides used on the crops that provide the vegan menu,
Mhm.
and not the 670 million that are harmed by the pesticides that
I
go on the crops that provide the items on the
I
vegan
didn't
menu.
see that. I didn't see that number, the 670 that were harmed. But the reason I cared about the 67 million that died is because I'm assuming that if a bird dies from pesticides, that's a painful suffering death. And I care way more about those birds having a painful suffering death than I do about the death itself. So if we could magically know that
But
those
only,
67 million were gonna suffer and die, I would
yeah,
rather snap them out of existence than to have them suffer and die. So it's
right,
not the
right.
death.
But you only care about the suffering, not the deaths. And so
Mostly care.
only 10% of the birds that are harmed by pesticides are harmed bad enough for them to die. So 67
Mhm.
million die, 670
Yeah,
million are harmed
I
and
didn't.
suffer.
Yeah, I didn't see that number. And again, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt now. Right now in my brain, I'm thinking, I don't think JD is lying to me. So as soon as I see that number, I will add it to my list of sources of
Okay, hold
information.
on.
Mhm. So while you're looking
But
that up, though, are
yeah,
you okay with doing a B12 talk, or do you feel like that's not one with enough information on to do?
um, here's I'm going to go over real quick what I told you before. Okay,
Okay.
here's what you want me to do is you want me to prove that um, manufacture of vitamin B12 requires coke, coal, petroleum, right?
Hmm.
And that
I don't
that's
want.
harmful to animals.
If that's what your claim is. I don't want you to do anything. I like the idea of
No,
me and you discovering truth together based
yeah.
on claims you're making to me.
Here,
Yes.
if I can find one source that has a manufacturing process of vitamin B12, I'll provide that. I
Okay.
so far I have not been able to find one source. I know that there are different manufacturers of vitamin B12. All of them require steps with heat. And every
Mm.
time you have any manufacturer of anything that requires heat, that usually means methane. So it's burning methane. There are other chemicals that I had to look up how they were manufactured, and those chemicals required coal or coke from coal ovens. So I'm not going to be able to provide you just one. Like I said, it took me months to compile the information to figure out how this synthetic vitamin B12 was being manufactured,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had to piece together
Yeah.
this mosaic of information so I could get an idea of what it actually
Yeah.
entails.
Well, let me cut you off real quick because I don't want you to supply me with one specific anything. I would guess that you do not want me to take your word for anything you're saying. You would want if what you're saying is the truth that you've discovered, you would want me to know that truth as well. So I would need to see what you saw. Now, it'll be complicated if you saw a lot of things that led to it, but I'm a huge fan of reading. I love reading and learning, especially if it's something that I am causing. I do take vitamin B12 supplements. Now, I don't take them that often because I don't think I need them because I eat bivalves, but I know plenty of people that don't eat bivalves that take B12 supplements. And on top of that, I would love to put a video on my channel telling all vegans, just be aware of this. This is how we get our B12 supplements. So don't take more than you need or something like that.
Do you know how vitamin B12 is manufactured?
Not at all. And I want to just share it with me. I do got to hop
Okay.
off here like in
Are,
less than 5 minutes.
are there any other supplements that you take?
The supplements I take, so I occasionally take omega-3 from algae, which is DHA EPA from algae. I take 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 every day. And then I take B12. Those are my 3 I take.
Okay. Do you know how the vitamin D3 is manufactured?
The one I have, I don't. I know your average D3 is from lanolin. Mine is a vegan D3. I don't know how that one's manufactured.
Right. So right now we don't know how your any of your supplements. We know that the DHA EPA is coming from algae, but we don't know exactly which body of water it's coming from. We don't know if the harvesting of this algae is causing any animal suffering and death. We don't know. Right now, you're taking the word. You're just kind of arbitrarily claiming that they're vegan, but you don't know anything about how they're manufactured.
No. I care way more about my own health than the health of any other human or animal. So I will take it if I'm convinced that it'll be good for my health. And then after that, anything I do will be for the benefit of humans and other animals.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you're taking these supplements without having any idea of how they're being manufactured.
Correct. And same thing with the bivalves I eat. Those have DHA and EPA as well. But there's a difference between, like, I don't know how much of the ocean is being destroyed by harvesting bivalves. I don't know how many of the bivalves I have are from bivalve farms versus bivalve. And so there's so much that I don't have the time to look into, but I like picking new things to look into, and I'm giving you full reign to pick the next thing that I deep dive into.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do is I want to focus on the crop deaths.
Okay.
You want to talk about the B12, but exactly? I'm still trying to figure out what it is. Or do you want it like how it's manufactured so that you can see
you told me something about
into it?
You told me something about B12, so I just wanted to read what you read. But let's skip that. Let's do the runoff. Let's have our next talk be about runoffs. And how about you just send me either articles, studies, research papers, Anything you want, send me a couple things that I can just read thoroughly, and then I will personally try to track down countering arguments, and I will bring those forward to you when we talk next.
Okay.
So we can basically try to learn together, and mostly it'll be me learning from you with any of the stuff we're talking about. But hopefully you'll want to know the truth, and you won't want something to just line up with what you want to be the truth. I assume that of you. I didn't mean that in a negative way.
Well, I think that my behavior shows that that's the case. I mean,
Correct. 100%.
Hey, when I was about 5 years old when my mother took me to watch Bambi the first time, I cried. I cried, almost became vegan. Actually tried veganism when I was in college. And so, it's not like I am someone, the worst. I can't stand to watch people debate vegans that say that the animals don't matter, that they don't, the animal suffering doesn't bother them. None of that is true. I came to the conclusion that a regenerative meat-based diet is not only healthier for humans, the paleo style, nose to tail, everything organic, regenerative, not only causes less animal harm and suffering, but is ideal for human health. So I'm where I am philosophically when it comes to nutrition, diet, crops, livestock, because I took an honest approach. I never did. I'm not going to take a supplement without getting an idea of how it's manufactured. Because if I was to let's say we had a world where I get to vote today on a vegan mandate, and we mandate veganism. The next day, all of the livestock are euthanized. We don't have any domestic livestock. All cats, all dogs, all cows, all sheep, they're all gone. It's behind us. No livestock, no domesticated animals exist anymore. And then all of a sudden we find out that we don't have the resources to continue to manufacture all these supplements, except for maybe for the next, 25 years. And then after that, everyone's going to become deficient in X, Y, or Z. And that will cause the extinction of the human race. I just don't think that vegans, when it comes to vegan propaganda, will just swallow it. But when it comes to counter arguments to vegan propaganda, then it's, give me the studies. It's like, well, give me the studies that provide that support well, I don't have any studies, but I have a documentary with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. And he said, screw your freedom. So he must be right.
Well, I'm not declaring anything. I'm declaring that if I walk past a dog, it is more moral than if I kick a dog while walking past it. Now, anything past that, we're going to need information to find out. So I make my own choices based off my own assumptions, just like all humans do. And then anything I know to be true, objective truth, I know from researching, from understanding, from learning as much as I can. And so that's what I want to do with you. And I actually wouldn't be surprised. I don't think I will be a person that eats meat in my life. But if I do become a person that feels identically to what you're saying, and I decide that the best thing for humans and animals is to eat animals and have a ruminant animal combination with cropland and whatnot, I honestly, I'm telling you the truth, I would not be surprised. I would not be shocked, because the world is complicated and there is so much I don't know that if I end up feeling that way, that wouldn't be shocking to me. Which is why I want to delve into this kind of stuff. But as of right now, I am not making a claim that the world will be better off with these runoffs and all this, the way crops are done today or anything like that. My only claim is that I feel convinced I don't need to eat animals. I haven't eaten animals in a long time aside from bivalves. And if I walk past a dog, I'm not going to kick it while I'm walking past it. So every little bit of non-harm that I can knowingly do, I'm going to do. So I want you to show me that I'm knowingly making animals suffer by the crops I'm consuming.
Oh, hold on. No, it's you're not going to knowingly do it unless you know of all the little ways that you're doing it. Right?
Exactly, yeah, and that's what I want to learn.
And so it's just because someone doesn't know that they're harming animals doesn't mean that animals aren't suffering.
Correct. 100% correct.
Right.
Cool. Okay. Well, so I got to hop off here. It was a great talk. Let's set one up soon. And if you're up for it, let's do the runoffs. If you decide you prefer a different focus topic, just let me know. But if you're cool with the runoffs, just send me like maybe 3 links that you want me to read about runoffs.
Yeah, I can send you lots of information on runoffs. The manufacture of methylcobalamin or cyanocobalamin is a hard one to nail down as far as like getting one source that's got the whole thing. I had to piece that thing together, and like I say, it literally took months. And it's a little bit of information from here, a little bit of information there, and then you can say, well, not all vitamin B12 is manufactured the same, because each manufacturing company can have little differences in how they do it, but they all require petroleum. They all require fossil fuels. And we know that fossil fuels are not only a finite resource, but they're being rationed. There are some locations in the world that are having electricity curfews where they, rolling blackouts and things to, because most of the electricity is still generated through coal and natural gas plants. They burn this, create heat. They have big boiler rooms that boil water, creates pressure. They've got a machine that translates that pressure into electricity. So anytime you find that there's heat being involved, whether it's cooking eggs, cooking broccoli, making methylcobalamin, that heat 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 is coming from fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels.
Gotcha. Yeah, and maybe we'll have time to look into that at some point in the future, and I can delve into it as far as you have. But yeah, let's focus on the runoffs. And
if I can find the kind of thing that you're looking for, and I will look, then I'll bring that as well.
Okay. Yeah. Either way, yeah. Just and shoot me an email because I wanna read up on it and tell you what I've learned from what you've sent me, and then if I find some articles that I might think be worth reading, I'll send them your way, and then we'll talk again.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
You too. Bye.